Hey everyone, welcome back. Our next talk is going to be by Kendrick Kay from the University of Minnesota. And he's going to tell us about how to give a good scientific talk and good scientific communication. Kendrick.
All right, let's get started. Hi, everyone. This is an impossible task, so I'm supposed to tell you all about, this is just one of 3 talks I'm trying to do in 90 minutes, so we'll see how this goes. I'm trying to engage you. Actually, this talk is meta because I'm going to talk about giving talks, and I am giving a talk right now. Okay, let's just get started. The plan is I'm going to first talk about talks, scientific talks, which I will define. I'm going to talk about figures, and then I'm going to talk about writing. And the writing one is the biggest one, and it's the hardest one, I would say. I'm going to leave that for the end. So try to stay with me here. Okay. I have a common structure to all of these, and if you, yes. Am I on it? I don't even know what that is. Okay. I like, if you ever talk to me, I'm a broken record. Like, what's the goal? Identifying the goal is actually the first step to almost all the problems we deal with as a scientist, I would say. So what's the goal of giving a scientific talk? You think about it right now. I'm going to tell you my opinion. And I should just preface this whole, the series of things I'm going to tell you, these are all kind of my opinions. I'm just making this up. And I think a lot of what I say is like obvious and people agree, but some of it might be controversial. I'd be happy to hear. I would say the goal of a scientific talk is to communicate information. And in fact, I'm talking about 3 ways to communicate information in the series of talks I'm going to give you. One is talks, which I'm doing right now. Another is making intricate scientific figures. And the third is writing formal scientific papers. And they're all very different ways to communicate information. And they actually all have the same goal, as I'm indicating here. I'm just transmitting you information right now. Hopefully I'm doing a good job. I don't know. You can engage, and I actually want to know. One of the points I will make throughout this is to know whether you're doing a good job, you have to ask people. You need feedback. The whole goal, this is a very social, communication is between agents, me and you. And the only way I know if I'm doing a good job is if I ask you. It's very different from writing. I should just preface, this camp's about like writing code. This is completely different. This is very human oriented. Code is about you and the data and the numbers and getting the right answer, or maximizing correlation, prediction, whatever. This is different. We're talking about communicating information. So in science, this, I think, breaks down into the following. You need to tell people why you did what you did. You need to describe in detail and accurately what you did. And finally, presumably that we're talking about like finding out stuff about the brain. So what did you found? And you need to describe that. So these are the fundamentals as a scientist. Thinking more broadly, again, there's actually a whole social aspect of this. I'm trying to communicate this talk to you, which is not about science, it's about doing science. But if we're talking about a scientific presentation, the goal ultimately is to get people interested in your work, right? And so if you do a good job as a communicator in your talks and your papers and your figures, then, well, you want people to read your papers and, well, believe what you're saying in the papers, and then they will like you. In the end, this is all about getting people to like you in some sense, and maybe even collaborate with you. They like you so much they want to like spend their time working with you. Anyway, that's kind of how I think about this. Okay, so there are good talks and bad talks, and really, I wish I could give you a bad talk because it's important to understand what is bad in order to know how to make a good one. I don't have time, and the same goes for figures. I have some examples of figures that you will see. Presumably they're good figures, but it would have been even more useful to show you terrible figures. And same goes for papers. It's hard to learn to write a good paper unless you see examples of bad papers. I don't have time in the next 90 minutes to do that, but I just want to throw this idea into your brain so that you and your lab or your friends can actually maybe spend some time looking at bad papers and comparing, contrasting them to good papers. That's ultimately the most valuable way to learn, I think. Okay, so going back to just talks, scientific talks, 10-minute talks, hour-long talks, 90-minute talks. I will say what I'm doing right now is an atypical talk. This is a kind of a tutorial talk. It's about issues that we don't typically talk about, actually. So it's strange, but the focus of this set of slides is on giving, a traditional 10-minute talk or a lab meeting hour-long talk, or like a seminar at a conference. So that's the scope here. So good scientific talks, I want to point I think I'm on a soapbox this entire 9 minutes, but I want to make the following point. It's not just about, do you understand what I'm saying? Am I delivering a clear exposition of my project? I want to emphasize it's about engagement. And you could argue directly about engagement because I'm communicating information to you. And if you're not engaged with me, you're actually not even going to get the information. So ultimately, it's about communication, I think. And it's just, if you can do it and you can engage your audience and inject energy into it, they will receive the information better, right? Ultimately, that's about the information. And so just a little explanation here. Ideally, your talks would inspire someone. Often, and especially in neuroscience, we're all doing different things. And in fact, it's very hard to even know, even within this room, I would say it's a challenge to really get to the bottom of what each person is doing, because our projects are very diverse. So it's hard. So you have to work when you give a talk to inspire the problem. They're not thinking about your problem. So you actually have to get them to care. So you have to ideally inspire your audience, make them excited about your problem, even though it's not their problem, right? And entertainment, I'm going to get back to this theme in a couple slides. These are all ideals. I'm not saying this is easy, and I'm not saying people typically do this, but in my view, this is the ideal to strive for. So there's a balance, and this is a meta comment about the next 3 mini talks I'm going to give you. A lot of this is general and is not about science, but I also want to sometimes step and make it specific to science. And in science, making a good talk is especially challenging for the following reasons. What we do is technical, it's hard, there's a lot of details, and for you to understand, and I'm not giving you a scientific talk, right? I'm giving you a meta talk, but if I were to give you a scientific talk, it's taxing on your brain. And you all have sat through, 45-minute, hour-long talks. By 30 minutes in, you're just exhausted and you zone out. We all do this. I do this all the time. And therefore, it's extremely challenging for the speaker to sustain your attention. I'm just sort of saying things that hopefully you fully agree with. It's hard. And if you're at a conference, typically that's like where we get a lot of talks as receivers. It's hard. After one 10-minute talk, you're already tired and you're supposed to listen to 4 more, 5 more, take a 30-minute coffee break, and then go back for another session. It's crazy. It's extremely hard on the receiving end. And that gets reflected in the person giving you the content. It's extremely challenging for the speaker to actually try to sustain your attention for 5 minutes. Like that's extremely, extremely hard. And what I'm trying to do in the next hour, 90 minutes, I already have 10 minutes, is give you some tips as to what you could try to do when you design your own talks to optimize it to the extent possible. And it's hard because presumably you're here because you're a good programmer, or you have a background in math or statistics or machine learning, whatever. You weren't chosen because you're a good public speaker, or you're funny, or you know how to emote. And I'm not trained in this. I think I'm okay at doing emoting and explaining and trying to engage. But yeah, part of the challenge here is you're not selected for these skills. And at the same time, it's extremely important. If you're going to be an academic, yeah, you have to be good at your science, you have to have good ideas, you design good experiments, analyze data well, whatever. But there's this whole other communication aspect. You have to write well, which is the topic of the 3rd mini talk you're going to hear in a second. But right now we're talking about talks. Ideally, you talk well. So you can get by without being a good speaker, right, in science. But it helps if you're also a good speaker. And that's like, I'm just trying to convey the importance of communication, I guess, even though you're a scientist. Okay. Feel free to jump in and stop me, but given how this is laid out, it might be good if I just kind of go on for a while. I will break after this mini talk on talks, and then we'll have a little bit of discussion. Okay, some basics of thinking about giving talks. A lot of this should be obvious, so I'll just go quickly. It really depends. Like, what are we doing? Right now, this is a strange, atypical 90-minute series of talks I'm giving. I thought about designing these talks, but it's a very specific type of talk. Depends on the duration. You know, are you giving a long 90-minute lab meeting versus a very fast 8-minute talk at a conference? These are all different. They have different constraints, and that constrains how you design your slides, how you pace yourself, whether you stop for questions or not, and so on and so forth. So I think that's pretty obvious. I would boil things down to two basic design principles. You got to think about who you're talking to, right? The communication. I'm talking to you guys. You guys are young scientists, maybe, you know, and versus, you know, at a conference, you're talking to experts in the field possibly, or in a lab meeting, you're talking to like friends and coworkers, right? Different people come with different knowledge. People have different friendly or antagonistic attitudes. Like you think about who you're talking to. That's principle number one in terms of designing it. And then second is think about the narrative. And hopefully you've heard this many, 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 many times. And this is not specific to talks. Narratives are in papers and arguably also in figures to some degree, but figures are obviously part of a paper. So let's maybe contrast talks and papers. They both have narratives. Like and okay, let me explain that for a second for those. So here's the narrative typically in science. You start with the problem, like I want to understand whatever, autism, or I want to figure out how the function of white matter, or I want to, you know, understand visual perception. So you start typically in science, like here's what I want to figure out. And then you have to explain, well, what do we know so far? Or like how do we, or what's the topic that we're trying to get into? So that's introduction. Then you start telling your audience, like, this is the narrative, it's the story. Like, I wanted to figure this out. So I sat down and like, I designed this experiment, or I read the literature and I identified something that we, you know, some data set that we really need to acquire or whatever. So you tell the audience like what you did. You designed, you gathered data, you did whatever, you analyzed it. And then final or third is like, okay, you did something. Typically it's analyzed data and you got some results. So you show what you got. And then you kind of talk about, okay, so relating this back to the introduction, okay, so we learned this such and such about the brain. Okay, so this is super generic, right? And this, I would say, is the same for papers, right? There's this general narrative that we all engage in again and again and again. Hopefully you'll write many papers over your career. It's the same old stuff. We're almost like cranking a little gear, like, okay, you of course tackle different problems, use different methods, but the general structure of the narrative is the same, okay? And linking this back to the point of the narrative, a common problem in papers, common problem in talks is the narrative was not clear to the receivers. Like the person like lost, like they started showing this figure, that figure. It's not even clear why they did this analysis, or the audience forgot what the problem was, or like, it's the narrative that's really important. And so when you design your slides, think about the narrative, like it's a story. You have to lead your audience through your story. And hopefully that makes some sense. I see some nods. Okay. Okay, so I'm drawing a parallel with papers, which we will get to, but it's not the same. So talks, we're talking about design talk, your 30-minute talk, whatever. It's not the same. Hopefully this is obvious, but I will just beat it into your head here. How are talks different from papers? Well, talks are not comprehensive. There's no way you can convey all the information that's in a paper in a talk, and you don't want to, because talks are tiring. You know, you have 5 minutes, you have 10 minutes, so they're different. Even though they have the same narrative structure, they cover different things. So don't include all the gory details in your talks. Okay. Talks are different also because you can be a little more informal. You can kind of talk, you know, talk trash about some other thing, kind of sometimes, well, nowadays it's recorded, so maybe you don't want to do too much of that. But anyway, you can do things in talks that you don't really, or you shouldn't really do in papers. And talks it's a different delivery medium, right? It's easy to include movies. I can show you a movie. In papers, of course, you can click a link and go to it, but who's going to do that, right? So there's different things you can do in talks. You can use that to your advantage. And then something I've already touched on is just thinking about papers and talks, two very different ways to convey information. And to me, this is an interesting one. When you sit down to read a paper, you're usually rested, you're ready, you're focused, and you actually want to read the paper. No one's forcing you to read that PDF on your computer, but you, for whatever reason, are motivated to. And so you're actually in a better mental state. Right now, you're really tired, presumably, right? You've been sitting through days of talks. So you're in a very different mental state. And so the onus is now on me. So I can either write a paper about the content I'm giving you right now, or I can deliver a talk about it. It's interesting because right now I'm using a lot of energy. Like you're tired. I have to put a lot of energy to kind of communicate the information versus a paper. I'm not even there, right? You're home reading the PDF. Like I'm no longer involved. So the kind of mental imbalance here is completely opposite. You're tired. I'm not tired, or I actually am a little tired, but anyway, okay. So let me speed along a little. It's hard to explain how to design talks by just talking, right? I just want to put that out there, but I'm going to do my best. Just general tips, and yeah, I'll just go through this. Sorry, there's another meta principle here, which is, why do we even give talks? Like right now, I'm giving you text on the screen. You can just read this text. So a bad talk is one that simply gives you what you could have gotten in text form. So I want to be imbuing this with extra stuff. So there's maybe energy I'm imbuing with. I can tell you stories about these bullet points. Like I can give you more. So a bad talk is one that simply reads the slide. Hopefully that's clear. Do not stand up and read the slides and that's it, because you're not adding anything beyond the words. And they could just download your slides and look at them. So hopefully I'm giving you more than just the words right now. Okay, anyway, so tips on making a scientific talk. Some of this is maybe controversial, but hopefully I'll see nods and people will agree. You generally want to minimize text because science is hard, figures are complicated. There could be 10 figures in a paper, people are tired. So generally speaking, don't put a lot of text in your slide because the audience's attention is divided. If I put 100 words on this slide, you're busy trying to like read the slide because that's very natural. Like, oh shoot, what is all this information? And you're not listening to me. Right? So in general, you want to minimize text. Obviously, there's a balance. Like sometimes you need text on there. Very relatedly, big and visible. The font size here is large. So people in the back of the room, at conferences, maybe the screen is small, you know, people are standing, they can't see. You want people to, if you put stuff on the slide, you want to make it visible. Why put it up there if people can't read it? It makes no sense. And you've seen instances of this, like figures with like tiny text, like that makes no sense. It's possibly annoying. They can't read it. They're distracted. They're not even listening to you because they're trying to squint. It makes no sense. And in tongue in cheek, I kind of want to say, and I have said this many times, the best talk, my ideal that I try to strive for is the best talk is one with zero visuals. And the reason, so it's tongue in cheek, but the reason is if there are no visuals, it forces you, the speaker, to focus on your narrative and to focus on the words, and your audience is completely focused on what you're saying if there are no visuals. And so what that means is it forces you to make your delivery and make your narrative really good, right? It's trying to make you do better. If there's visuals, then you're kind of pushing the, what's the expression? You're kicking, or you're offloading. Sorry, let's just skip that. Okay, let's move on. Explain your figures, and you probably have seen this by your PR, whatever. If you put a figure up, scientists want to know what it is, and if you don't explain it, they're going to be angry or annoyed, or they will just tune you out. Like if you put something on the screen, it's got to be good, and figures are complicated. You have to explain it. No one knows what you did. Analyses are complicated. The experiments we do are complicated. No one will know unless you actually tell them. So by explain, I mean verbally explain, unless the figure is self-explanatory, right? So if I'm showing you an image of, I don't know, a brain, you don't have to explain anatomy to people. Like you can assume that this goes back to audience. You have to try to tailor it to like what you think your audience knows. But 9 times out of 10, most scientific data figures that you put up, no one has any clue. They're tired. They haven't thought about this for the hundreds of hours you have. You have to explain it. Explain the axes, explain the data points, explain what the take-home message of the figure is. And this is a common thing that is violated. I did a little bit of this 20 minutes ago when I started. I tried to give you some context of why I'm blabbing up here, right? So in a scientific talk, that would be something like, I'm presenting you a work in progress, or this is a paper that we recently published I wanted to give you. And And this could also be like, I want questions, or you don't want questions, you know, so explain to your audience before you even start, like, why are you there? What are you hoping to get out of this? What do you want from your audience? Okay, let me speed a little. And the reason I'm speeding is you can obviously read these slides, and I'm gauging right now how much time to spend on each thing. And I'm trying to read the room. I'm trying to see if you care. If people are glazing over or sleeping, I'm going to move on to the next slide, right? That's okay. Okay, it goes without saying, you need to practice, especially when time is critical. You're at a conference, you have 8 minutes, they will stop you. Do not be the person who's halfway done with their talk and the person's like raising the red flag thing. Like that's just embarrassing. So don't do that. Practice your timing. This one I like a lot. Nowadays with Zoom, I do this all the time. I record all my lab meetings, I record my talks, and I listen to them because you have to know if you're good. And the best way to know is you ask someone, but the second best is you listen to yourself with an open, critical mind. Like, were you delivering a good talk? Was the narrative clear? Like when you're delivering a talk, it's very hard to also listen to yourself. I'm thinking about what I want to say next, blah, blah, blah. But once you record it and you have time and relax, just listen to it. I think it's extremely helpful if you can get over the embarrassment of listening to yourself. Okay, the next couple points are all related. Again, it all stems from the fact that you're tired, you don't want to listen to my science. I really have to convince you it's interesting. You really need to beat the listener over the head. Science is hard. No one's going to remember all the details. So take-home messages are extremely important. Like even if you forgot the middle of the talk, just reminding the audience, like what are the take-home points? That's extremely helpful to the listener. Less is more. Again, same principle. Don't show them all 10 analyses. Focus on the important ones. No one's going to remember everything. So just give them a couple things to hang their hat on and just to remember. So less is more. And I already said this. It's very helpful at the end of your 10-minute talk or your hour-long talk to just remind the audience what the take-home messages are because they're tired, they don't care, they're hungry, whatever it is. Okay. And I've already mentioned this one. To make a good talk, it's iterative, ideally. You make a version, you practice it to your friends, you get honest feedback. If they tell you, like, and honesty is very hard, especially if they're, you know, if you're sensitive or they don't want to hurt your feelings, but you really need honest feedback. That's the only way you know if your communication worked or not. Okay, I'm almost done with my little talk. So I couldn't help but also talk about, you know, writing and figures, but I'm almost done here, and then let's take a pause for discussion. This is just my way I think about talks. Giving talks is really hard. You can kind of achieve level 1, level 2. After you do it so many times, you will get really good, hopefully. So again, I think of this as like, I'm kind of being Jerry Seinfeld right now a little bit. I'm trying to engage you. I'm trying to have vocal dynamics. Like this will come with practice. So don't worry too much. Like it's better obviously to have it would be nice to have all of this, but I'm like, don't worry that if you're not a great public speaker, if you do this 100 times, you'll get better and better. So once you're tweaking making it ever so slightly better, like thinking about your vocal dynamics, thinking about pauses. Like I could do better. I should pause more because, you know, if I was giving you a scientific talk, you know, flooding you with information, it's nice to give the audience like a 10-second or 5-second break. So when I do scientific talks, I do pause just to rest, but also give them a chance to ask questions, right? And give them a chance to just let the ideas sink in. So thinking about your dynamics, your timing, your hand motions, your facial expressions, assuming you're looking at my face, like these are like cherries on top. Like it would be nice if you could, you know, one day get, you know, to this level of stuff. Okay. Anyway, so yeah, I think there's a parallel with what I'm trying to do here and performances like comedians or public speakers, so to speak. Yes, question. Yeah, so the question, I was told to repeat questions, I will restate. It's kind of like, how do you find the balance of kind of the level of detail or how you describe a complicated analysis, for example, because your audience may vary in how much they already know, or, you know, is that inaccurate? Yeah, I don't have any magic strategy. It's hard. Often, sometimes you will find yourself talking to a mixture of both experts and complete newcomers, and that's inevitable. Like at a seminar in a department, there will be some people very close to your work and some people that, you know, study social psychology or whatever, right? That happens, and there's no best way. There's only least. Well, I need like a 5-second break, but yeah, there's no. It's hard. The best you can do is provide, you know, a little bit of catch up. Like, here's the basic concept for those who are completely new, and then just move on, right? You can't cater to just the one person who knows nothing. You can't cater to only the experts. So you do a little bit of both. Okay, so that's all I had on giving talks. Let's take a 30-second or 1 minute for discussion, and then we're going to move on to figures, and then we're going to move on to writing. So any questions or comments or disagreements? I'm actually curious if everything I said here was like obvious, or if there was something that actually you weren't in total agreement on. JB? TED Talks.
Why? I think it's kind of like a risk. That's I don't exactly why. Way of doing it that is
Yeah.
It's kind of a fake aspect to it.
Fake? Did you say fake?
I mean, structured and so repeated and so kind of tuned and like when something is more genuine, I think I just like direct and I don't know.
Okay, yeah. So let me restate. Yeah, so JB was referring to TED Talks. I've seen a couple of here and there, but I will say I don't watch a lot of them. But I think I know what you're griping a little bit about, which is the kind of faked or overly dramatic tone that TED Talks often have. I agree, but in that defense, like it depends on the audience. Like the point of a TED Talk arguably is a little bit of that. It's not a scientific talk. It's more of it's kind of a science meets the public and try to inspire the public type of talk. So if that's the goal, then it kind of makes sense. But I agree with you that I personally don't like watching those types of talks because I'm a scientist. I don't think I'm the audience for, but of course TED Talks don't have to be only about science. So maybe I am the audience for non-science ones. But yeah, I would draw a big distinction between TED Talks and what I mean by scientific talks. And they're very different.
When I want to talk to someone, I want to tell them something. And what is that message? I think that's a bit what you were saying.
Yeah, the take-home messages. I agree. Yeah, I agree. In fact, I will self-criticize here. What I just gave you in terms of this talk about talks, I don't think I did a great job about the narrative nor the take-home messages. I'm not even sure what I'm trying to even say yet. And this is because I made this talk yesterday. So I will say what I just gave you, well, A, it's not a scientific talk, and B, it just in terms of talk quality, I don't think what I just gave you was that great for that specific reason. Okay, Eric, John? Hand-holding slides. So often in hour-long, so sorry, John referred to like outline slide, guidance slides. So I think you're referring to like in an hour-long talk, often you have like, here's an outline what to do, part 1, part 2, part 3. I think they're helpful. And they don't take that much time, so I don't think there's a big harm. Yeah, Oh, I see. It helps people who zone out. Yeah, that's something I didn't touch on, but that's a good point. For long talks, I kind of said this, it's inevitable, 20 minutes into an hour-long seminar, half the room has zoned out. And yeah, it's either your fault or actually it's always your fault. But it's, yeah, it's almost inevitable though. Ariel?
Yeah, just a couple of questions from Slack. The first one, I think maybe you'll answer soon, which is about how to make really good figures and animations for talks. So maybe that's the next presentation.
Yep.
And then the second question is about how, if you have any advice on how not to be too nervous before or during a talk, how would you do that?
Oh yeah, sorry, I didn't touch on that aspect. Nervousness, like public speaking in general. I don't have any deep thoughts other than practice. And yeah, obviously some people have a personality to be more introverted or whatever. It's unfortunate, right? As a scientist, you're forced or you're asked to do something that you may not be good at. But you could argue the same as for like, I don't know, math. Some people aren't good at math, but if you want to understand the brain, you probably have to use math. So I don't know. But yeah, for nervousness, just practice. I don't know what remedy there is. Yeah, thanks. I agree 100%. I want to add to that a little bit. I didn't really get, I mean, there's so much more to be said about talks, but relatedly, there's a whole spectrum of strategies you can do as a potential upcoming speaker. So one thing, and you can do whatever suits you best, but for short talks, 8-minute talks, it's totally fine to like write the script out. People do this. That will presumably reduce your anxiety because at minimum, you just have to read your script, and that's okay for like 8-minute super fast talks. It could be helpful. It's also helpful. And then a different strategy for kind of related to what you were saying is, and I do this myself, and this is more of a personal story. The way I practice like 10-minute talks or yeah, for short talks where time is pressure, and this may not work for you, but it's what I do. I just throw myself into it. So it doesn't have to be perfect. And I find after you do it for the 5th time, just without practice, like you practice by doing, and that will actually, I think, reduce the anxiety because you just get good at kind of winging it. Anyway, that could be helpful, or maybe you're of a type where writing out the script is helpful. Whatever works for you, I guess, is what I would recommend. Comment, question? And then maybe one more, John, and then we should move.
Watching yourself is about pausing your cadence and your body language.
Right. Yeah, vocal dynamics, monotone, bad. Some people, but again, it may be hard. Maybe that's your natural talking style, in which case you have to work to fight it. It takes work. Okay, let's switch gears to figures. So scientific figures. So, and by this, I mean like data figures primarily. Of course, you can have schematic figures or that, but our bread and butter are scientific data figures. Okay, same deal. What's the goal? You should know what the answer is by now. To communicate information, but in this case about data. And by data, I mean data in the broad sense, like analysis results, the raw data, everything. Okay. So already there's some interesting nuances here. So it could be about showing like the so-called raw data. Of course, data gets transformed in many stages. So you could either show like data, like images or specific time series points or whatever. You could also want to show, like, schematize how you dealt with it, like what model you used, what technique you used. So you might want to convey that. And you might also want to convey kind of your final answer. Like, I got significant activation here, or my classification performance was blah, like, which is in some sense a number, right? There's this interesting, like, we go from massive numbers of numbers down to like one number or a few numbers. So there's a massive compression here. No one's going to be happy if you only show the last thing, right? If you, why have a figure if your answer is 5? You can just say that in the text, right? So there's this balance. You don't want to show too much of the raw data, that's impossible. And you don't want to only show the end number. So you kind of want to pick and design a middle ground. Part of the goal, and I'm jumping ahead of myself, is if you only show the final, if you summarize your whole paper with the bar, I got 40, like no one's going to believe you. Right? There's no evidence that you actually did anything correct, right? So the part of the goal of a figure is kind of lead your reader, communicate that you actually did something reasonable, and that communicate something about the raw data, because that's what's going to convince your audience. All else being equal, I would say, and maybe you don't agree, and of course it's a balance, but the more information you convey in your figure, the better, all else being equal. You can already imagine, wow. At some point, if no one wants to read a paper with 50 figures, so okay, I'm not saying multiply your figures by some crazy factor, but in general, we want to convey more and more information to our audience, and I think all else being equal, that's good. So here's my metaphor. You want this. This is your audience. This is your reader. You want them to be so enthralled by what you did that they get it. So there's this flash of insight, like they got it. So people know this movie, hopefully, Matrix. Okay, so there's information getting conveyed to this person through a wire, but the metaphor is you want to achieve this. You want them to get the information. You want them to be awake, alert, and like have that insight of like, oh, wow, I believe it, or I understand what you did, and it's cool, okay? All right, good figures. A lot of this is obvious. So you want a figure, since we're scientists, to be like quantitatively accurate. You don't want just like some cartoon hand wavy thing. You want the bars, the figures, the dots to be actually correct. Like they're actually reflecting what the data points and analysis of those data points are. You also want, I would argue, a pretty figure. And it's not because we're looking at figures to derive pleasure, but a pretty figure is one that conveys, it lets the information, it facilitates the communication of information, right? If it's pretty, it's like not misaligned. If things are aligned and you know, are well structured, like it just facilitates the information communication. And this goes along with that. Like ultimately, it's about communication. You have a reader, you have someone who's looking at your paper. You want them to get the information easily, quickly, and accurately. Okay, this should all be obvious, but I just wanted to lay the groundwork here. So what I'm going to do in the next couple slides is just show you a couple figures and talk a little bit about the principles of why it makes a good figure. The caveat is you don't have any idea what the science is behind the figure, so I'm going to kind of divorce it from the science and just talk about the figure itself, like the visual design of the figure in a sense. So here's a couple principles that I just made up. And hopefully this resonates with you. Every little thing in your figure matters. Every choice, you use a dot, use a line. What color is the line? How big is the line? What's the font size? What words do you use for the words in your figure? We have access labels, those matter. Scientists care, they want to care, or hopefully they care. And they will be looking at it and they will be scrutinizing it. And every little thing matters. And whether it's pretty or not, it kind of matters. if things are I already said this, if it's misaligned or you're using inconsistent terminology, or you use a weird color here that makes no sense, or if your color map is wrong, like it will cause confusion. Your reader will be mad at you. They will give up. They will, not like your paper, whatever. So it kind of matters how it looks. This one I think is a little more subtle, which is what we do is extremely complicated. There's a lot of information to convey, and we have a figure caption. Okay, in an ideal world, this figure is self-explanatory. You can just show the figure, which of course may have some words on it. Ideally, it would all make sense already, but in practice, that's never going to happen for what we do. So we have a figure caption. Now, a common pitfall, I would say, is captions that reiterate what the figure says. That makes no sense. It's a waste of space. If you have axis labels and they're well designed, you do not need to explain the axis in the caption. Like I see this all the time. It makes no sense. And if you do this, what's going to happen is your caption is going to be 3 times the size of your figure and is redundant. And there's also limits on how long figure captions can be or even should be. So don't make your caption redundant. Your caption should be complementary. It should help the figure out. There are some things that you can't really say in the figure itself, so you have to say in the caption, and vice versa. So design well, and this is an iterative thing. I will say this on the next slide, but it's not like I can just sit down and make a figure. I have to design it, sketch it out, try it, see how it looks, see if it fits, then design the caption, and then realize, oh shoot, that would be better explained in the figure. So it's iterative. I got to go back and forth, modify the caption, modify the figure, and it's just iterative. For optimal figures, take iterations is really my point here. A few more principles. White space matters, space matters, right? Papers are like physical objects in a sense, not anymore. And yeah, we have a lot to convey. We don't have 10 pages to convey it. So just think about white space. And then finally, and this is a super general point, it applies more than just figures. Think about what the point of your figure is. Like there's going to be a take-home message, and typically that's the title of your figure, like blah 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 performance in this data set, or the finding, like high selectivity found in blah blah blah. Think about the point of the figure, and then ideally how you design that figure all contributes to that point in an ideal world. Okay. Some of you may know this figure. I just need to it would be weird if I talked about figures and not actually show you figures. So I'm going to show you a few figures. I don't expect you to know what this figure is showing. I know it's small, but I just want to relate or give you a sense of how these principles relate to the figure. So every little thing matters. So in this figure, what's going on? There's colors, there's visual elements like dots, there's lines, there's vertical lines to try to give you a sense of the x-axis here. There's schematics in panel A. There's schematics in panel B. Every little choice matters. And there's white spacing. These panels are arranged in a specific way to make good use of white space, so there's not a lot of dead space. There's text, carefully chosen text. There's text sizes. Every little thing on this figure matters. Is this figure pretty? I don't think it's that pretty, but it's not terrible. So that's like this principle. I don't know. Maybe I could have thought about it more and made it prettier. But in terms, well, I will comment on spacing. Like things are aligned. These panels are aligned. They use, everything is perfectly aligned. So in some sense, you're reducing cognitive load. If they weren't aligned, the reader might think, why aren't they aligned? Is that different? And they would spend that extra time. So you want to avoid that. Like spacing, alignment, consistent terminology, stuff like that. And I don't want to belabor the point here, but there is a division of labor between what's actually shown in the figure and the caption. If you sat down and looked at the caption, which you can do since the slides are available, you will see like the caption does not reiterate stuff that the figure already shows. It instead says stuff that the figure does not say. Okay, a couple tips. I've sort of mentioned a few things. I've already mentioned it is an iterative process. It happens all the time. I think it's inevitable. You have to try, see how it looks, see how it pans out, see the visibility, and then iterate and iterate. Now, in terms of actually making figures, this is a little out of scope, but typically we write code or sometimes use tools to make stuff. But insofar that it's code generated, to save time, ideally most of the figure generation is done via code, right? Totally automatically. If you want to tweak something, just change the font size, rerun, and you don't have to spend any of your time. That being said, the best figures require, I think, manual intervention after you do everything you can in terms of the code. Like repositioning things is extremely hard to do in code. Constructing multi-panel figures can be done to some degree automatically, but sometimes it's best to just do it by hand in Inkscape or Illustrator or whatever your final graphic software is. And then this you've already heard for talks, it's the same for figures. I think this is a useful exercise. Give your figure to someone, doesn't have to be a co-author, could be someone in your lab or even an outsider. See how much information was actually conveyed. Try it without the caption. Often, busy scientists, you just like glance at the figures, you're busy, you're impatient, you don't read the caption. So just give them the figure and see how much they can get from it, right? This is an empirical, we're scientists, we like testing things out. So test your figure on someone and see if, and actually even better, have them stumble and try to explain it back to you. And this will be extremely insightful. You will see like what misconstruals or misassumptions that they have if they like try to explain your work back to you. Like it's actually kind of fun. Okay, so I have a couple examples. Let me check the time. We're okay. So I just want to try to make it concrete. These are, again, what's being shown here is irrelevant. Don't worry about what this actually is. But I just want to point out a couple of the figure design principles here. So notice white space. This is packing in as many of these brain maps as I can in a fixed amount of space. Like there's not a lot of dead space. There's also color map choices. This color map was very deliberately chosen. There are, depending on what type of data you're showing, there are definitely bad color maps and good color maps. Think about that. It's kind of annoying, but it's actually really important. Obviously, there's a choice of like how much to threshold these things. And there's also anatomical labels. So it's hard to see. So maybe that's a deficiency of this figure, but there are little text labels here, trying to label different parts of the brain, again, because that's helpful for the reader. Otherwise, if you're not used to this particular view or this particular cut, you have no idea what you're staring at. So there's a bunch of design principles getting implemented here. Another example. Again, don't worry about what it actually is showing, but look at this thing. There's a lot of different visual elements. Everything is being done hopefully for a reason. So there are colors being used for these labels. These colors actually show up in other figures from this paper. Another design principle is the following. A shows, like in some sense, all the data. These are voxels. So here's kind of a full picture reader. Here's what I saw. But now I'm going to cherry pick one and I put a star right there. I want to show you more information about this one voxel, and that's shown in B. So you kind of hit both things. You're not cherry picking and only showing the reader one thing. So therefore you show A, you show everything, but you also zoom in on one just to give them a better sense of what's going on. So there's all this detail that can be associated with this one voxel, and that is this whole other panel. There are like little vertical lines to kind of help you see these are stimuli. Notice the Y ranges are deliberately chosen to be the same so that you don't have to exert more mental load to kind of interpret the Y axis. They're actually the same. Yeah, okay, moving on. Another example. Okay, there's a lot going on here again, but let me just try to convey some of the principles. So these tiny little things, oh, do you see my cursor? Shoot. Oh yeah, it works. Okay, good. So see these 5 little insets? So I think this is a useful trick. We want to know, typically you have a lot of subjects and you want to know, does it show up in individual subjects? At the same time, it's hard to look at 10, 20, 100, 1,000 subjects. You also want a group summary. So here we do both. So the big figure, it's kind of aggregates or averages or something across individual subjects. And then the small figure shows you using the exact same figure design. So same axes, same color map, everything is the same. So in some sense, I don't have to label these little guys anymore. That would be impossible. They're so small, you don't have room to put little numbers. So the trick is you design it very carefully such that the little guys are just like the big guy. And now you can show the individual subjects and the reader gets all this information and they're happy, right? A common comment in the review process is like, oh, can you show individual subjects? And then you wait 3 months and revise it. But here you just give the reader as much as you can, as long as it's effectively communicated. Okay, let's move on a little bit. Okay, so there's obviously you could go on and on. I hope that was kind of useful seeing some concrete figures. There are more examples that I collated from unbiased. It's easiest just to steal from my own papers. There are available at this website. Oh, one thing I didn't mention. It was actually at the beginning of this talk and the talk. These are QR codes that are links to these slides that you're staring at. So you can just download them. And this is a QR code linking to essentially my lab internal website, but like over time it becomes more and more public. So it's kind of a public site. This is like reference material that I decided, if you actually want to know, you can just go read it. Like, remember, talks are not papers, talks are not written text. So I culled from this website material the stuff that I thought would be better conveyed verbally, which is what I'm doing right now. If you want more information, you can go refer to like the textual form of, and there's a lot more. So I'm just giving you this link in case you are curious. Caveat is it was meant as an internal website. It's not super well polished, but it's like, I think it's readable. And so buyer beware. Okay, we'll pause for questions and or take like a 1-minute break so I can figure out what I'm doing. John.
Very small.
Yeah, so the comment was, do certain journals like make figures for you? Current Biology, you notice, like have really nice clean figures. I actually don't know. I will just tell you what I do know. Back in the day, so many years ago, yeah, I participated in when a paper was getting published, like they like edited my figure and like made it a little bit different and made possibly cleaner or made it worse. But nowadays, I have not experienced this in the last 10 years. So my guess is it doesn't really happen much. Maybe with the exception of like Nature Reviews Neuroscience, like review journals, they have a certain visual style. So I think they do more hand-holding and making your figure conform to how they like figures, but I haven't really experienced that for primary research articles lately. Comment, question? Oh, go ahead. Oh, so just to restate, the issue of like indicating which part of a complicated data figure is significant with asterisks and such. I don't do that a lot. I don't have strong opinions. I've never heard of a journal like dictating whether you should do it or not. So I think it's up to you whether you like to do that type of stuff or not. Question, comment? Am I a fan of posting the original data or model? I'm not sure what you mean.
Or we should like.
I'm not, okay, maybe you're getting at like, which is something I did not touch on, which is Nature journals actually, okay. There's this checklist form that Nature journals now require you to fill out, even if it's not even accepted yet. It's very time consuming. One of the elements of that form is like, it's very heavy handed, but they're basically saying you should not show bars. You should show all the individual data points. So now for certain types of neuroscientific studies, that makes sense. It makes less sense for neuroimaging where there's like too much, like there's no way you can show all individual data points. Anyway, I'm just alerting you that there is this form you may fill out one day, which is kind of annoying. But anyway, it's related to, I think, what you're touching on, which is you have a choice. This goes back to deciding what visual elements to use to show your data points. You could choose to use a line or a bar, which is just signifying one number, I suppose, or you could choose to show the distribution, like with a histogram, a violin plot, or you could show individual data points. So that's a choice you have to make. And it should be based on like your best understanding of the data and like what's most honest, I would say. all else being equal, it's nice to get more information according to my principle. So all else being equal, it would be nice to see all the individual data points, just that in practice, it may not make sense. If you have 1,000 data points, there's like no way, you have to summarize it. So is that kind of the issue we're getting at? Within a limit, like again, you can't always show all the numbers because the figure will explode. So, but it's ideal to maybe strive for, or to consciously decide in each case, does it make sense? Can you show more data points or not? Like that's something you should think about. Question, comments? Yeah, cool. The comment was about your institution may provide some support in terms of figure making, if I understand correctly. Yeah, I haven't used that or heard of it, but that's interesting. Any other comments or questions about figures before? Yeah. Figures in the middle of a sentence? I've never seen this. I've never seen an interrupted text figure.
One more question
Oh,
from Zoom.
yeah, question.
For those of us who are not artistically inclined, do you have any advice for how to make pretty figures? I know one when I see one.
So the question is about people with not super skills in graphic design.
Learned.
How you learn. So I don't know. I mean, I break that question down into different parts. Like, do you mean how to use a tool like Inkscape or Illustrator, or do you mean like how to design, how to think about what makes it? Those are different things, right? One's technical, one's more artistic, I suppose.
I think that's more.
Latter. Go to design school? I actually have no idea.
The question that now more elaborate is like, what particular platforms for like visualizing neuroimaging data, for example, particular like, software?
Oh, yeah, I don't have anything. I mean, the website that this links to, I think lists tools, or I can update it. I should just expose the whole site. Yeah, nothing off the top of my head. Obviously, we have lots of tools and visualization software at our disposal, but I guess talk to your colleagues if you want specific hints. Okay. I have half an hour, right? All right. Switching gears, writing. I saved it for last because it's the hardest and arguably the most important, at least in our current scientific culture. Like, I mean, we go to talks, listen to talks, and obviously figures are part of papers. So really papers are the currency. I guess that's a metaphor that you may have heard. It's the currency of scientists. Write papers, get it peer reviewed, get it published, right? Okay. The main take home message of, and there's no way I can convey everything there is in this slide deck, so I'll just start with the punchline, is writing is extremely important, extremely hard to do well. And there are very clear principles that, and I use the word should intentionally, should be used when you write scientific writing. There is good and bad. There are rules. On the other hand, there's definitely style. Like no one wants to talk like ChatGPT, I assume. We don't all want to have the same voice. So there's some style involved in scientific writing to some degree. I would say, I don't know, 20% style, 80% of it is like mandated. This makes good writing. So I just made up those numbers. Okay, that's my take home message. I made this talk in a different context. Some of the slides actually get more into meta issues. I just find writing very interesting. So part of it's, I think, irrelevant for what we're trying to do here, which is help convey what makes good writing and help you write better. the caveat is it's crazy to think that you'll learn how to write by listening to me talk, right? This is mind-boggling weird. Like, why am I even up here? Really, what we should do is work on writing, have writing class, writing exercises. And that I have attempted to do this with people I work with, trainees to some degree. That's also really hard. Writing is just hard. Okay, so for what it's worth, I will delve right in. Just anecdotally, I am trained as a philosopher, and in some sense, all you do in philosophy is write. Well, you think and then you write. Well, you read, think, and write. Let me put it back. You don't collect data typically construed in philosophy. Some philosophers are more like tied to science, let's say, but for the most part, the convention is you just read and write. So maybe I got good at writing just because I was trained as a philosopher. I don't know. Okay, so notice I am going back to talks. I am skipping this because of time, and you can just read this. I don't think there's that much interesting here. I'm just going to move on. I'm just remarking on my talk strategy here. Okay, let's define what scientific writing is. It's primarily, I'm talking about research articles and all the steps that go into putting the words on the PDF instead of the page, the PDF. So this involves, in general, you got to think about your narrative. Notice I said the word narrative probably 5 times already. There's a narrative in a paper. Good papers have a narrative. You have to design it. You have to think about what that narrative is. So you think about the narrative, then you start organizing the things that conform to the narrative, the structure, the thoughts, the flow. First, I'll talk about this and motivate that. Then I will tell you about the experiment or whatever. So there's a kind of a organizing your thoughts and then getting more and more concrete. This should have said outline. So hopefully you outline before you write. Outline is not really sentences, but it's putting the thoughts in order in some structured fashion. Then you convert the outline to sentences, like valid English sentences. And then you fine tune, think about word choice and so forth. So this is what I consider in scope for scientific writing. And we're not talking about today, like writing, like how do you write a sentence? Like how do you, I assume people know how to write a sentence. Actually, that's not true. So for foreign speakers, people have said like ChatGPT is super useful to just deal with the act of writing valid grammatical sentences. And that's a whole nother topic. I'm interested in what people are using AI tools for. I don't use them, but it's also very scary, right? But I'm not really going to get into that too much. Okay. As I've already said, scientific writing has a lot of rules in a sense, and there's good and bad. It's a very specific type of writing that you actually have to work at. It doesn't come naturally. Why is it weird or hard? Well, it's technical. This same thing, right? With talks, it's hard to give talks about science. It's hard to write about science because there's all this jargon, there's a lot of detail, and you have to communicate it in order to communicate the science. So it's technical, it's complicated. Articles have mandated structure. I already kind of said this when I talk about talks. There's an intro, there's methods, results, discussion. Of course, nowadays methods kind of go at the end for various aesthetic reasons, but in some sense, it's the same thing, right? So there's a stereotypical structure to formulating scientific writing. And just like with talks, good writing inspires, although it's very hard, right? It's just words. How are words going to inspire? Well, you do the best you can with the words on the page. With talks is different because I can like scream at you and gesticulate. But with writing, it's just words, and words seem boring. So you really have to craft the words well. Ideally, you have to motivate your audience. You have to convince them it's a worthy problem. You have to, motivate the analyses, explain to why the analyses make sense. All of this stuff, right? Okay. So why is it so hard? Okay, hopefully all of you already agree it's really hard, but if you're extremely new to science, you might actually think it's easy, and you might submit a first draft and think it's good, right? And maybe this happened to you 5 years ago, 3 years or whatever, and you were, you had a revelation that actually, no, your first draft was terrible. Okay, so why is it hard? This is more of a sociology question. I never took a writing class. I never took a class in scientific writing. I guess nowadays maybe they exist. I don't know how good they are, but it's hard. Teaching writing is hard. So anyway, so it's not formally taught typically, I think. Typically you learn by doing, and your first paper is going to be terrible then because you haven't done it yet. And it takes 5 papers, maybe 10 papers to actually get good at it. So that's another reason why it's hard. It's hard to teach. right now I'm talking about writing. How is this teaching you how to write? I agree. It's almost useless. It's hard to teach. You have to learn by doing. It's like riding a bike. You can't listen to a lecture on bike riding. And we have other things to do. This is probably the biggest one that resonates. Like, we got to analyze the data. We got to collect more data. We got to change the code programming. We got to make the data public. We have to whatever, blah, blah, blah. And then we also have to write about it. And writing is really hard and you're tired. And after you've been rewriting the paragraph for 10 times, you're like sick of it. And anyway, so it's hard for that reason. Like, we have other things to do. We aren't just only writers. We're also programmers and whatever, data scientists or whatever it is you do. Okay. I will skip that a little bit since it's self-explanatory. Okay. I like this set of 4 bullet points. Just like talks and figures, you have to design. Design means you're balancing multiple constraints. There's some optimization problem in some sense you're doing. Like, it can't, so the first one here, length. You don't want a 20-page article. You don't want a 1-page article because presumably you can't convey everything you did, say methodologically, even in 1 page. There's some balance. So you're balancing length of the text you generate. You're also balancing detail. So typically the reason we have a method section is that's where the methods go. However, in the results, when you're telling the reader what you did, what you found. So especially for papers where the methods are at the end, if you just read from beginning to end, you just get straight into the results. So you have to reiterate a little bit some of the methods and results. Otherwise, like, you can't just say we found blah. You have to say a little bit about what you did to find it, like what experiment you ran and what analysis. So there's some choice about how much detail, right? You don't want to put too much because otherwise your methods will be duplicated in your results. That makes no sense. You don't want to put too little because otherwise the reader will have no idea what you did and they can't even interpret your results unless they know something. So you have to think hard about how much detail in this context, how much methods to put in your results. Okay, so you're balancing that. You're balancing, like, sometimes the words you say are very high level, conceptual, especially for like introduction. You have to like wax big picture. So that's important. At the same time, you also have to turn on your precision hat when you're especially in the method section. You have to be extremely precise. Ideally, you want the reader to know exactly what you did. So there's both low level and high level writing at the same time in the paper. Anyway, so there's all these criteria to balance while you're designing your writing, in a sense. And there's also, obviously, many different ways to write the same thought. And this gets into philosophical issues, like what's the difference between the thought versus the writing. But anyway, so that's another reason why good writing is hard. I put this up because maybe you have an experience like this where 2 people argue about the way to write this, but at least in my experience, I find this very rare. I think if someone has the time to give you comments on your paper, for the most part, there are, like, everyone agrees, like, that's, with some exceptions. Okay, hopefully you will never find yourself in a scenario where you and your PI are just like changing the sentence back and forth, which I've heard stories about. But I think, well, I don't know, maybe just hopefully you don't encounter this, but it is possible that people disagree on what is a better way to say it. Okay. Why is it important to write well? Communication. Yes. If you don't write well, your reader won't get the information, or they will get the wrong information and then say an annoying comment in the peer review process, and then it'll waste a month of your life. Okay. So hopefully I don't have to motivate why writing is so important. Okay, this is maybe a straw man. So one could entertain the idea, wait a minute, I'm a brilliant scientist. I have this amazing result. Who cares exactly how I talk about it? That kind of makes sense, but at the end of the day, we are all humans so far, I think. And humans need to understand what you did. Like, the thing doesn't stand on its own. I will say there's one exception. So if you are only a, I don't know, engineer or programmer where your goal is to make a thing, maybe you can live as a programmer or engineer and just make it. And if it's good, people will buy it, in a sense, or download it. And you don't have to write about it. But that's also not quite true. If there's a tool, there needs to be documentation. Maybe you'll hire a scientific writer to write your documentation. Anyway, but in one special scenario, maybe if your only goal is to make something good, I guess you don't have to learn how to write well. But aside from that exception, if you're a traditional scientist you know, generating ideas, testing them, showing results. Like writing is what we deal with. And you have to communicate your ideas to your reviewers, to your grant reviewers, to your department, to your colleagues. Like this is a social activity that we do, actually. Okay. So if your writing is boring, people will lose interest. I think we all agree. If you're writing, if you don't motivate the question, or you don't motivate why your approach is great, your grant reviewers won't be convinced, and you won't get funding, and you will get driven out of science, maybe. And again, I think this can change, but currently writing peer-reviewed papers is very 20th century. Like now, you know, the publishing industry is changing. Obviously, we can upload movies, we can share code, but it's still pretty conventional, I think, on the whole, that, you know, introduction, methods, results, discussion, the PDF is like the primary thing we do and how we communicate information to other people. Okay. Let me see. I'm trying to gauge time here. Let me take a 10-second break while I decide which of these to do. Okay, let's skip to this. Again, if I had more time, I would have examples of bad writing, and then we could compare and contrast to example of good writing. So here, in lieu of that, I will just tell you kind of ideas on, and maybe you can imagine bad writing that either you made or someone else made that has these pitfalls. Okay, this one's kind of tongue-in-cheek. Like, you don't want to say a sentence that's not true, hopefully, right? So that would be bad writing. Okay, let's get to more interesting ones. It's not clear. This happens all the time. We do complicated stuff. We're trying to describe complicated things, and the words, in the end, we're just manipulating words. The sentence is not even clear what you're saying, and this is a common pitfall. Narrative, I've talked about narrative so many times. So even if each individual sentence is true, and even if each individual sentence is clear, if how they're strung together makes no sense, you have failed. Right? Like, you have to tell me why this analysis was even done. Like, okay, you've told me what the analysis is, I understand, fine, but what does this even mean? Like, that's the larger narrative. You have to tell the reader why you did this and explain it. Bloat. I don't see this that often, but maybe if you are new to writing, like you start just like dumping everything that you did into a gigantic list, that's bloat. Don't say things that don't matter is really the idea here. Boring. Okay, this is common. People don't care about your problem, so you have to motivate it to them. So bad writing is one that just like boring. Like, why did you do this? Why is this important? Like, you need to somehow guard against that. Okay, let's switch a little bit to like practically speaking, writing. Writing is a month-long, if not year-long endeavor, depending on how fast you get at it. Okay, so it's hard. It's a marathon. You have to sustain somehow. So here are some random tips that I thought of. How do you do this? Well, think about your own relationship to writing. Like, do you enjoy it or not? If you don't enjoy it, it's sort of a slog. It's like pulling teeth. You have to force yourself to do it. So there's different tricks you can do. Like, you can reward yourself if you write one sentence. You can, like, whatever it is you like, eat chocolate or pay yourself or whatever you like, drink beer, whatever. These are tricks. Like, it's a very personal activity, and it's hard, and it's time. And if you don't, yeah. So anyway, come up with tricks. Come up with like a timeline. I do this myself. I will just say, I know how I write and what I'm good at and what I like and my pacing. I just write down like a timetable. Today I will finish the introduction or whatever that means, right? And so that easier said than done, of course. But what I mean by that is a common pitfall is you get stuck. You get stuck at this one sentence, or you get stuck on, say, the intro, like, oh, it's not right. And you spend another week on it. That's like wasted time. So when I stick myself to a timetable, I've trained myself to just stop at some point. Like, I'm going to do the best I can to get the logical organization in place for the introduction by Tuesday, and I will stick to it, and then I'll move on, right? And this is like playing games with myself, and because I know how I operate, so it works for me. Of course, your own, what you might have different tricks for yourself, but I'm just reporting what works for me. Some people say this, I don't do this, but like force yourself to write a little every day. I see some nods. If that helps you, great. But again, you need to do whatever works for you, but these are just ideas. Okay, how to get the words flowing. I think I really like this one, so I will stop here and explain it. We talk a lot more than we write. Therefore, we're very good at talking, hopefully. So talking is a type of writing in some sense. It's a way of communicating information. So if you're good at talking, one trick is just say it out loud and then listen to what you just said and type it. It sounds trivial, but some people don't know that this is a good trick. So if you're great at giving talks, record it and in some sense, look at the structure of the narrative you just gave your audience and like write it down almost. I mean, it's not going to be exactly formal scientific writing, but the structure might actually be great if you're good at talks, right? Adapt to whatever you're good at. Or just like analysis. Let's say you've been staring at this analysis for months and you're going to talk to your lab mate and then like just say, or let's say they haven't heard about the latest version. So we're good at this. It's just like, hey, what are you doing? And like, oh, I did this analysis. Can you explain it again? And then we're pretty good at just like explaining it. It might not be the greatest explanation, but it's at least words and probably in some logical order that could be extremely useful to transcribe into formal writing. So one trick is just say it and use that as the basis or the starting point for your formal writing. Along similar lines, text, converting the text to, I'm like getting tired here. I'll just report what I do. When I write, it's very taxing to convert visually presented words to phonological sounds, right? Like reading it silently to yourself takes effort. So what I do is I just have my computer read it to me. And that is super helpful because I don't expend that energy and it's very natural. Like you can be your own reader. And so you have the voice, computer voice and your computer read, and it can even help you find where the flaws are, right? If you're listening to it and trying to forget that you wrote it, and you're just listening to the story, and all of a sudden there's a non sequitur. It's like there's this weird transition that makes no sense. You will hear it, and that's super useful because then you can go and fix it. Okay, ChatGPT again. I alluded to. Could be extremely useful, but use with care, of course. I have zero experience with it, so I don't have much to say about it. Okay. Let me skip over this. A lot of this you can just read, right? Okay, feedback. So probably some of you have already written manuscripts and passed it around to your co-authors. You need to develop a thick skin as a scientist. Like you want criticism. You want it. The worst thing that can happen is you give your overleaf or Microsoft Word document or Google Docs to someone and they come back after a week and there's like 2 suggestions. Like, what is that? No, you want honest feedback. And there's different types of feedback. I will just riff a little. It's not just like change this word or delete this sentence. That's like low-level feedback. There's also high-level feedback, which is very different, which is like, this entire paragraph makes no sense, or you didn't explain this concept. Like that structural level feedback is extremely valuable. You want it. You want your co-authors to tell you that it's terrible, like you do. And so if you're sensitive about that, I don't know, just develop thick skin. Here's one thing I do to make it nice on the person whose paper I'm commenting on. No one wants to see track changes all over the paper, right? It's just annoying. And it's ugly and hard. So if I think that a lot of changes are necessary, the best thing to do is discuss it. Talk about the underlying problem. Don't try to fix it for them because your fix may not be great and you may break other things. So if there are major issues, you want your people giving the people whose feedback you're trying to get, you want to have a discussion, and it's funner and arguably more productive to have a discussion. Okay. Yeah, track changes is terrible, but it's like the least bad way, possibly. Someone needs to invent a better method. Yeah. Okay. So common pitfall. Hopefully you've already experienced terrible writing needs like a complete rewrite. But what is a rewrite? So let's define that. In my view, a rewrite is like you fundamentally change the narrative, the flow, the structure. This is bad. You want to avoid writing, spending hours on text, and then someone telling you, and they, let's assume they're right, that you need to change the structure of your paper. That's terrible. So what's the best remedy for that? Hopefully you know this already. You work on your outline. You spend 90% of your time crafting the outline, and then ideally, and then the rest of the time you can spend actually making sentences. The outline is like the foundation for your building, right? If the foundation is wrong, everything's wrong, it will collapse. You will waste a lot of time rewriting. So you want to avoid rewrite, and the remedy is outline well. This is a whole nother talk, right? There's a whole art and strategy to making a good outline, which I don't have time to get into. By the way, meta comment about talks. I see people losing interest because it's been an hour and 20 minutes, right? And so my job as a speaker is to like engage you again. And of course that's hard, it's hot, you're hungry or whatever, you have other things to do. So, but I'm just making a meta comment. Okay, anyway, so outlining really well is important. I don't have time to tell you how to do that, but that is a whole nother topic. Here's one thing. If you have a good outline and you feed it to ChatGPT, I bet the text will be pretty good. That's my prediction. ChatGPT is pretty good at like finessing the little things, the act of constructing the low-level sentences. So I've never done it, but I bet it will work well. Not that I'm recommending using ChatGPT, but I kind of am. Okay. Let me skip some of this stuff. I have a couple minutes. Yeah. So let's stop here. Again, I fully acknowledge like listening to me talk about writing, how is this going to help you? But I do think about practically doing writing stuff. And if you're curious, we can chat more about how to do it. Obviously, it's very hard to do in this context where there's 50 of you and 1 of me. Okay, let's stop there and let's take questions about writing. And oh, for the record, I did not actually show you any scientific writing in this talk, right? So that's weird. And ideally, I had more time, I would show you a good paragraph and a terrible paragraph. And I have done that in the past in other tutorials, but we don't have time for that right now. Questions, comments?
You got a name about?
Do I recommend it? No, no. But I do think that's a good idea to try to find. Yeah, I think that's a great idea. Like ideal papers we can all study and debate. The problem, it's hard because if it's outside your field, you may not get all the nuances. So you sort of need to do this within your lab or within like-minded people. But I do think in general, it's a great idea. And also the reverse is a great idea. Example of a terrible paper or terrible written paper, like the writing being terrible. John. I have never read any of them, so I don't know.
Question from
Online question? Or...
Yeah, so two-part question. Could you help me understand why you called the counter argument against good writing a straw man? I think that was earlier talk. And as a follow-up, how would you say constructing good logical arguments is important for scientific writing?
Okay, 2 questions. I think this was a straw man. I called this a straw man because I never encountered anyone who actually has this attitude. So maybe it doesn't exist. That's what I meant. If you know of anyone who has this attitude, or maybe you have your attitude, I'd be curious to hear about it. But I wanted to include it on this slide just for completeness. The second question was, is logical...
Yeah, how important are good logical arguments to scientific writing?
How important are good logical arguments to scientific writing? Extremely important. And so I classify that under, I guess, the narrative and the outline. Like what I mean implicitly is like, it has to make sense. It has to be motivated by theory, like the statistical method has to make sense. So I group all of that under the idea of the narrative. Question? Yep. Got it. So the question is, sometimes boring is inevitable in scientific papers. I kind of agree if it comes to, say, methods. Sometimes you just have to say every little thing, and that's important. So I'm not saying don't do that. So methods, I agree, can be boring and almost inevitably boring. Fine. Everything else can be exciting, I think. And yeah, we could talk more about this, but like, yeah, titles. There are boring titles. There are exciting titles. Obviously, I'm not saying oversell. This is a whole nother axis. Like, do you want to say false statements or overgeneralize your result? I'm not really saying you should do that, but there is definitely more exciting, more focused titles and less ones. I mean, same for all the rest of the paper, the abstracts. Actually, I have spent a long time with examples of abstracts and critiquing them and giving like, here's how it could be different. Here is a choice, like this author, either for abstracts in progress or published abstracts. We can critique abstracts. And I actually think that's the most time efficient thing to do. It's very hard to critique a whole paper, but we can critique one paragraph. And a good abstract, which is another whole topic, a good abstract is a summary of the whole paper, right? It's, you basically have intro, methods, results, discussion, typically. So anyway, abstracts are super useful for learning how to write better and realize what's good and bad. Comment, question? How do you meet your own self-imposed deadline? So do you mean psychologically, or do you mean in terms of all the other stuff we have to do? Like
With writing.
with writing? Well, okay, here's how I think about it. Ironically, writing is trivial. It's just words. So I can type, I can move my fingers to get words on the page in 2 minutes. So if my goal was to finish, you know, the 4 paragraphs of my intro by tomorrow, I can type 4 paragraphs worth of text in 5 minutes, right? That's not the bottleneck. So I mentally tell myself that, and it's almost like you have to finish, like you force yourself to finish, even if it's not perfect. You force yourself to do a first pass at the, you know, outline, the logical organization, even if the sentences aren't perfect. You at least have something on the page. I literally do this, and I actually take this to the 10th power. I can talk to you more offline as a kind of my own trick of how to get fast and get good at writing. I force myself to iterate, or it's like passes. I can write 1 pass of a paragraph in 5 minutes, and that's a little bit of time. That's not a lot. And then I just force myself to do that, and magically, it's kind of like practicing talks. One strategy for giving talks is just throw yourself into it. And I also do that. Like, I did not rehearse any of these things I just blabbed about for the last 90 minutes. I didn't rehearse this. I just now threw myself into it. I won't say it's the greatest delivery I've ever done, but this was practice for the next time I do it, if I do it again. And just, anyway, so the practical tip is, it may help yourself to just throw yourself at the writing and force yourself to write a version of paragraph, even if you know it's not perfect. Yeah, more? Sure.
Is all good persuasive writing narrative driven?
Is all good, let's say the scope is scientific writing, narrative. Can you give me an example of scientific writing that's not narrative driven?
If you're writing like a methods paper, explaining like what you're doing, does it have like timeline to be engaging to the audience?
Yeah, interesting. For sure, the scope here was traditional, you know, empirical or simulation-based, like research articles. There's a lot of other type of writing we also do as scientists. You're like documenting, you know, you're writing a website or writing a symposium proposal. These are not primary research articles. So I agree there are different contexts within science that don't necessarily conform to the formula that I kind of went over in this talk. And I also agree method sections have maybe minimal narrative, like the subheaders in your methods are kind of narrative, subjects, MRI protocol, like that gives you some structure. But yeah, you don't really have to say, like, you don't have to do a lot of motivation for your methods. A little bit, but not a huge amount. John?
Intro, paper versus biology or nature, giving a full narrative story at the beginning, or way, and then all the details later. In some ways, I almost think that even if you're writing it, paper, kind of wrapping it into that, get your story tighter, then you can kind of translate it.
I see. Yeah, sorry, John pointed out rightly that occasionally journal style is like, but wait, hold on. Nature Neuro is still even intro results discussion. So nature is more of like, here's just one body of text. So I agree that's not the typical model and a bit different. Yeah, it's actually a very different style, I suppose. Yeah, maybe we should discuss offline. I don't have any super great thoughts on that. I mean, it's not every day you try to write a nature paper, I assume, so maybe less relevant.
Yeah, I mean, those papers that are more distinct narrative, and that might, for people who are having problems with the story, be a good exercise to read some of those that are nature science or home papers and see how the whole story is put together in a shorter form, and
I see.
getting that highlight and going to your.
Yeah, so let me just restate, and I know we're over time, but John's point was he's intrigued by the single format type. I didn't know current biology does this, but either nature or current, and he's saying it's possibly useful to try writing one of those. From where I sit, I don't actually think of it as that different, because you still basically have probably intro and results and discussion. It's just more interwoven a little bit. But anyway, but we should probably end here.
So thanks everyone, and let's thank Kendrick. Well, obviously there's a lot of interest in this